Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Xinyan pre-release analysis! Woo! To the Dehya pre-release analysis. Before we get into, like, all of the pre-release things, Dehya is not very good in her current beta state. We're still gonna talk about what she can do, how to play her, all the good, the bad, and all that. But I think it is important to actually address that, yeah, she's actually, like, incredibly weak. She is arguably the worst 5-star. Definitely the worst limited 5-star, arguably the worst 5-star overall. I'm sure we'll have a bunch of comments on the video, like, no matter what I say, or like, no, people have said the same thing about Nahida, people said the same thing about Alhaitham, people said, who is people, man? Because I sure as didn't. I've never been this negative about a unit before release. Aircrafters weren't this negative about any of those units. Just because your best friend George 8369 on Twitter tweeted some dumb shit doesn't mean that you can then get to use that to say that, oh, well, I've been wrong before. Like, people have been wrong before. Yeah, but who? Is there a chance that she becomes better in the future? Well, if she's released in her state, so assuming that there's no buffs or nerfs before her release, kinda. We'll talk about what her kit can do in a little bit, but her biggest problem is her numbers, and technically they could make an artifact set that's tailored for her, but the numbers on the artifact set would actually need to be insane to make her good. And as usual, right, with any unit that's not that great, if you want to wish for them, like, I'm not gonna stop you. If you don't care about how strong a unit is, then don't let someone talking about how strong a unit is discourage you from pulling for a unit. If you don't care, you don't care. You, like, congrats. And also, don't wish for her on day one if you care just, like, a little bit about how strong she's gonna be, because usually we get leaks for the next version somewhat early into the patch, and we have had very, very vague leaks that there might be a new artifact set in 3.6. We don't know what it does, but it could be an artifact set for Dehya, and so it's not like you lose anything by waiting a week before you pull. With all that said, let's get right into, like, the usual pre-release stuff. We have news! I'm recording this right after the live stream, and it has been confirmed that Dehya is going to be a standard character. He's gonna have her banner, but after that, she's being put in standard, which means that most likely, they don't really intend her to be all that great. And so, from what I've said previously in the intro, it is not looking that great, and just keep that in mind when I talk about possible things that could make her better in the future in the rest of the video, that because she's not going to be a limited 5-star, she's going to be a standard banner 5-star, it's very likely that they won't do too many of them, if any at all. Keep in mind, the whole point of having standard character is that you lose your 50-50. Like, that's how the gacha system works. That's how they try to get you. They want you to feel like shit when you lose your 50-50 so that you swipe so that you can get to pity again. And so, because of that, it's pretty unlikely that they're gonna go out of their way to make a bunch of stuff that'll work with a standard character. So the news from the live stream of her being put to the standard banner after her raid up has made me a lot less hopeful for potential things that would work well with her in the future. It can still happen, but there's no real financial incentive for them to do it anymore. So just remember to take any talks of buffs, like potential buffs and stuff like that, with a grain of salt, and have fun with the rest of the video. High base HP of 15,675, that's among the highest for the 5-stars. Pretty low base attack, pretty low defense, HP percent ascension. She looks like she gets a lot of HP, that's cool, right? That must mean that she gets a lot of damage from that HP, right? Maybe she's like Yelan, right? And she scales a lot with HP, right? Well, as of the latest beta changes, yes, a little bit, but not a lot. Yeah. Her HP scalings are a joke. Her beta cycle went through, basically, there was the initial version, then she got nerfed for some godforsaken reason, and then very recently, yesterday as of recording this video, she got slightly buffed. They reduced her attack scaling a little bit, and in exchange they gave her some HP scaling, which balanced out to about 3%-ish more damage if you're using Bennett, and closer to like 10-ish% more damage if you're not. Anyways, normal attacks, if we compare it to Diluc's hit 160, 160, 180, 240. Dehya 114, 113, 140, 175. So if you were to find a way to give her a pyro infusion for her normal attacks, it still wouldn't be that much. Point being, like, she's not really based on her normal attacks. Charge attack, whatever, plunge attack, whatever, cool. E. Your E is basically like a Kutsing E that leaves an Albedo E behind. That's how you can think about it. You get a cast, it deals damage, you can reactivate it to deal damage again, and you get an Albedo E. Like a thing that deals damage when you hit enemies. The thing is, it doesn't deal a lot of damage. These are not talent levels 1, by the way, right? These are talent level 9. As we're going to see later, if you're building her for burst damage, or if you're building her for her damage, you want to focus more on burst damage, so the good weapons are going to be something like Aquamaru and stuff like that, and like the Joel, the fish. For now, we can just take a look at like Prototype Archaic, just like to get a baseline understanding of how much damage you're getting from that. Let's show what would happen if you were to actually build for E damage, so you went for something like Lava Walker. So the proc from your E, with Kazuha and Bennett buff active, would do about 8k damage. Her procs, depending on what team you play her in, whether or not they vape, whatever, all that. Like, the general thing you can expect at a baseline is closer to, I mean, you don't have VV, you don't have a Bennett buff, you don't have Power Resonance or Noblesse, for 5k, around 5k, and then with a lot of buffs, maybe you can get it up to like 20k on a vape, something like that, and it can hit up to like 5 times. There's also the initial cast of it, of course, but my point with this is basically her E's damage is mostly negligible, unfortunately. Oh, by the way, the E lasts for 12 seconds with a 20-second cooldown, and it hits every 2.5 seconds at best, meaning that it doesn't have good uptime, nor does it have fast hits. So usually, right, you have a character where their numbers are bad on their abilities, but it's fine because their application's okay, right? You look at someone like Toma, for example. Okay, sure, his numbers on his bursts aren't the best, okay, yeah, but hey, he hits quite a lot. He can trigger a bunch of Burgeon, that's good, right? This is not a lot, which means that this isn't really good in Burgeon either. So surely that means that her burst damage is good, right? Let's get into that. Think of her burst as like Sino burst, but very short. And also, Singto and Yelan don't work. And anything that even mentions normal attacks just won't work. Okay, so because of that, that means they gave her like way bigger numbers to compensate, right? So without buffs, we're at about 7.5k per hit. So that must mean that they gave her like 20 hits, right? No, she's got like 10. Most of the time, probably gonna be 9. Obviously, you can buff her, right? You can re-add the Bennett, re-add the Pyro Resonance and the Noblesse. Ooh, very nice. Now we're at around 12k per hit. We can give her the VV back. Okay, VV, nice. Okay, I had not removed Kazuha, so I had forgotten to do that, so, but it's fine. But we have Kazuha. 15k, that's starting to be, that's a Hu Tao normal attack. It's not even a Hu Tao charge attack, man. But this is a 1, right? Surely it adds up when you put all of them together. So let's take a look at how much it adds up to. So this becomes our total damage. That's 240k. Insane. Well, no, that is not insane. With these buffs, you compare it to anyone else, and you realize, oh yeah, this is significantly lower. Total damage, total DPS. Let's say you play perfectly, you get 20 seconds. That's 11k DPS with Bennett Kazuha. The average of this requires somewhere between 20 and 30k DPS if you play perfectly to 36 star. Because most people don't play perfectly, and you'll generally have some time that you like going between enemies if they spawn at different places and shit like that. Realistically, about 40k DPS is the like lowest-ish amount of DPS that a team would need to clear Abyss without having to reset a bunch of times. But that's for team DPS. The thing is, this is using Bennett Kazuha. You don't have that much room for another unit. You can put Sangling, sure, and you'll probably get to that 40k, but barely. And it's not like most of that damage is coming from Dehya. You'll be able to make her function in teams like that, but you'll be getting hard carried by the rest of your team because her damage is just not good. Now, one thing, the centers that I use are arguably a bit low. So let's say you go higher artifact, like higher investment total, maybe 240 total CV from artifacts. It's still, yeah. So that means that she's just a bad carry with nothing they can do, right? Well, not exactly. There is a thing that she can do and other pyro carries can't really do. And that's how she can work with Mona. Because she does all of her damage in a pretty short period of time, right? Her burst lasts 4 seconds. Because she doesn't work with Hu Tao or Yelan. And because in that short amount of time, she doesn't apply Pyro too quickly, you can actually use Mona with her and still vape the vapeable hits on your burst. Or at least you should be able to. Not entirely sure what the rotation would look like, but it would be something like it. You should be able to do something like that. So, what happens if you do that? You're gonna have to add EM to the list of your stats, right? Elemental Mastery, and then let's say you're getting about 100 from your substats. Now we're also gonna have to separate the motion value that's vaped from the motion value that is not vaped. So what you would generally get is you would get 6 of the normal hits unvaped, and then 3 of the normal hits plus the final hit would be vaped. Then on top of that, from Mona's burst, you'd get 60% more damage percent. And bam! Wait. Oh yeah, I forgot to add in the vaped part of it. Oops. Maybe Bennett's on Instructor and Mona's on Noblesse now, so get another 120 EM. I'm closer to around like 18k. The thing is, with something like this, now your last slot can't be Ling because your last slot is Mona. Which means that instead of having like 14-ish K plus Ling, now you have 18-ish K plus nothing. A team like this could actually struggle to 36 star at high investment. 36 star is not that difficult, and if you try to play Dehya as a carry, you might unironically be unable to. Like, not just, oh no, you can't speedrun, but like, unironically, oh no, you can't clear in time. It's very disheartening to see things like this. Thing is though, there is a reason why she's this weak, and the reason is because she gives you defensive utility, which I haven't talked about yet. After you use your E, you gain a buff, basically, that while your field is active, when your active character takes damage, a portion of that damage will be transferred to Dehya instead. Talent level 9 is 48, talent level 10 is 50, right? So about half of the damage that you take on your active character will be taken by Dehya instead. That's good, like that's nice, that's useful. She also has a passive where when her HP goes below 40% HP, you'll recover 20% of her max HP instantly, and then another 6% every 2 seconds for the next 10 seconds. That's another 30%, so 50%. But you basically get 50% of your HP back. Here's the thing about this. At the end of the day, Dehya is the only character that gets that healing. People very often need some form of defensive utility. The better you play, the less you need it. When you're playing with a healer, then you're just playing with a healer, right? You've got that going. Once you start learning the enemy's attack patterns a bit more, maybe you can get away with someone like Hu Tao instead, who gives you some damage reduction, damage resistance, whatever, and a little bit of healing so that the damage that you do take, you can heal it back up if it's not too much. The thing about Dehya is because she doesn't actually offer any healing to other characters, most people are still gonna need a form of healing on top of her. At which point, that damage mitigation doesn't matter nearly as much. It's still there and it's still useful, but one main thing to remember about this is that other characters also have forms of defensive utility, but then on top of that, they're also not completely garbage. Right? You look at someone like Zhongli. Zhongli gives you significantly better defensive utility and reduces resistances. Hu Tao gives you better defensive utility, again, significantly better defensive utility, and is also just the insane unit to begin with. Bennett gives you a different type of defensive utility, but in the form of just having a ton of healing, but also gives you a massive attack buff. What does Dehya give with her defensive utility that makes her worth putting on your team? Well, if you build the whole team around her, she's gonna be a bad carry. And if you don't, she's applying a little bit of pyro, but not enough to actually be the trigger for a reaction. So effectively, she's not doing anything. You can use her with tenacity and get pyro resonance, I guess, maybe. And that's not completely useless, but she just doesn't provide anything else. Her like damage mitigation also is accompanied by resistance to interruption. And her first ascension passive, you get additional resistance to interruption. Now, they changed it very recently, and I haven't really had news about how much resistance to interruption this is. But if it's a lot of resistance to interruption, she might have a place where she could be worth putting. Before the changes, it was not enough resistance to interruption, and you would still get knocked around by most things. The place where she could be useful for this is specifically in Burn Melt Ganyu teams, where you don't really need fast pyro, you just need some form of pyro. Technically, you can get away without any pyro, but having pyro makes it easier to play. You can play Ganyu, Bennett, Dehya, Nahida, right? It's effectively replacing Zhongli with her. You'd lose out on the resistance shred, but in exchange, you would get more consistent burning, and it would probably be easier to melt all of your stuff. That's kind of the only place where she actually has a purpose in a team over other units. And the only reason she does is because your other alternative for a team like that is Toma, and Toma requires normal attacks. And Melt Ganyu does not want to do normal attacks. Effectively, you can look at it one of two ways. Either I play her with her burst. I actually use her burst. If you do, well, your burst isn't going to do any damage without any buffs. So if you play her with buffs, and like as a hyper, she's a worse version of Xinyan. Option 2, you don't really play her for her burst, and you focus on the E for the application and utility it gives. In which case, unless you're in a team that can't normal attack, she's a worse version of Toma. Pick your poison. Worse Xinyan or worse Toma. It's painful because I actually really like what they did with the way that the burst worked with Mona. Actually having Mona be a vape enabler for a vape carry is just cool. Dehya looks sick. Her kit is unironically interesting. The numbers are just garbage. So what would they need to do for her to be good? Well, basically they'd need to double her numbers. She's kind of just that far behind, yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. I am reminded of another issue I haven't talked about yet. When you use your burst, it retrieves your skill, it takes it off of the field, and basically pauses the duration, and then puts it back at the end of the burst. Okay, I mean, that just means that your burst is effectively used to make it so that your E lasts longer. Your E's like power application is more evenly distributed throughout your rotation because you don't apply more power while you're bursting, which is good. Which, yeah, but also you generate energy when your E procs, which means that when you're in your burst, she's not generating energy. Which means that most of her energy generation is going to happen when she's not on the field. It also means that you don't get your own mitigation when you're in your burst. So not only do you not have any of that defensive utility, right? You don't have any of that damage mitigation, but also you're still taking damage from having mitigated damage for your other units before. Which means that especially from like the second rotation onwards, if you don't dodge that much, you're just gonna die in your burst. But honestly, the biggest problem with that is just that she stops generating energy in her burst, which means that most of her energy generation happens when she's not on field. Or you can keep her on field and then the rest of your team doesn't generate any energy. Effectively, because of that and because of the fact that she just doesn't generate that much energy to begin with, her ER requirements are actually pretty high. If you do end up playing her in that Mona team, she needs somewhere around 180-ish ER. I was using 170, assuming that you're going Fab Kazuha and Fab Mona. Your ER requirements are insanely high. And the thing about that is, usually, right, when you have bad units, it's not the end of the world because you can still just use them in Overworld because you like them. The thing about Dehya is, her E doesn't do any damage, so like all of her damage is in her burst, and she's very energy hungry, which means that in Overworld, she's also gonna feel shitty. Like it goes past struggling in Abyss, and it actually gets to the point where Overworld is gonna feel like you don't have enough damage. Right, usually when you have characters like that, you can just give them more ER or a Fav weapon in Overworld. You look at Xiao, for example, you can just give him Fav. The thing is, if you give Fav to Dehya, her damage that's already pretty bad becomes even worse. I did something for fun earlier, yesterday. I compared her output to Hu Tao and saw at which constellation Dehya starts dealing more damage than Hu Tao if you play Dehya with the Mona team, and Hu Tao just in a normal team that has Xingqiu. So even before taking into account Xingqiu's damage, Dehya was still doing less at C5, and it was at C6 that she got ahead. Now obviously Dehya's AoE is a bit larger, but it's not that large either. That was C0 Hu Tao with a Dragon's Bane. And it's not because Dehya's constellations don't do anything. Like from C0 to C6, you like triple your damage. C0 to C6 plus the 5-star weapon at R1, you like quadruple your damage. It's just because she starts from so far behind. Like her constellations are a decent increase, but she starts from so bad that even with them, she's just fine. Does that mean that she's completely doomed? Well, in her current state, yes, but not really. Because, like I said earlier, it's very likely we're gonna get an artifact set for her in 3.6. I would expect the artifact set to increase her output by like maybe somewhere between 10 and 25%. I don't expect it to be anything more than that. If it were 25%, she'd still be pretty bad. It's sad, and I'm gonna go for her anyways, and I'm gonna struggle to clear Abyss with her anyways. But yeah, I am very well aware, and if you're going for her, you should be too. And if you like her, and you don't care, that's good. I'm not telling you that you can't go for her. I would just like, as much as possible, to try to ensure that you know what you're getting yourself into. If, like me, you're telling yourself, hey, it's fine, 3.6 artifact set will save her. Just remember, units get reruns. You can always wish for a unit that you skipped, but you can't skip for a unit that you wished. You can't unwish for a unit. It's always better to hold off to be a little bit too safe than to be a little bit too trigger happy with your Primo Gems. Let's now go through her weapon options. Boris is her best in slot weapon. It's a crit weapon that gives her 20% attack at baseline, and another 20% when you take damage, and 32% HP. So for Dehya, it's 40% attack, 32% HP. It's just a good stat stick for her. Red Horn, good. You don't get to use the passive because her burst thing is not normal attacks, but it's still a crit stat stick. And if you play her as a carry, you very often are going to want Bennett because he gives you a massive buff, but also who the else is going to generate enough pyro particles to battery her? So, because you have a lot of attack, it makes crit stat sticks a little bit better. Skyward Pride, shit. Again, and you're gonna see this is a bit of a common theme, but normal and charge attacks. Don't use Skyward Pride. Pines, normal or charge attack, which means that you'd have to actually stack it up before you burst. Not happening. So effectively, you can't really get this passive, so it's only high base attack with a little bit of an attack substat. Unforged. Again, you probably are playing her with Bennett, which means that a lot of attack on a weapon isn't that useful. Same for Wolves. Let's now get to the 4-star options. We can start with Akumaru, general best 4-star. However, alright, it's a weapon a lot better at high refine than at low refine, so it's not necessarily going to be your best option. You might be thinking, what do you mean general best 4-star? Why not Serpent Spine? Well, as it turns out, taking damage from your passive, if you're on the field, which you will be when you burst, counts for Serpent Spine and yoinks away your stacks. So effectively, Serpent Spine doesn't have a passive. You're going to start with 5 stacks on your first rotation if you start on her before you start the chamber. But most of the time, all it is just a stat stick. A crit stat stick with nothing else. Yeah. We're getting a new weapon in 3.5, the Mailed Flower, which is an event weapon that you should be able to refine to R5 for free. At R5, high base attack, EM substat, and after your skill hits an opponent or triggers a reaction, you gain 24% attack and 96 EM. If you're playing her with Mona in a sort of vape team, this is actually pretty good. This is a pretty solid free-to-play option. If you're not, it's not quite as good, right? It effectively becomes kind of like a prototype archaic. Same base attack and 24% attack instead of 27.6, but about the same. Good in vape. Makara Aquamarine, which is the weapon that converts EM to attack. Basically the same thing. Good in vape. It's not quite as high for personal damage, but it will buff the rest of your team, and let's be real. Actually, in the teams where you actually vape, who is going to benefit from that attack buff? I guess Kazuha? Man. Okay, let's talk about Joel! The Luxurious Sea Lord, if you have it, is actually a pretty solid option. It's her best general free-to-play option, or like, given for free option. Joel is Joel. Joel is it's good. Not insane, not bad, it gives you burst damage, but yeah. Then you got Serpent Spine. It's fine. It's still a crit stat stick, which means that it's still generally slightly better than her free-to-play options, looking at like Mailed Flower, looking at Joel, but it's not very good. It's just like acceptable. Blacklift Slasher is decent. It's a bit better than Serpent Spine generally because it's basically the same stats, except you actually have a passive, whereas with Serpent Spine, it can be very hard to actually get stacks at all. Rain Slasher, fine in vape. At high refining can be a bit better than mailed flower, but if I remember correctly, not by that much. Yeah, not by that much. And then the bell, meh. The bell is not particularly good for damage. It's worse than the attack focused weapons, but at least you get a shield, and you're probably gonna die a lot on Dehya, so that's that, I guess. And then finally, listen. Unless you just really like Dehya, the best way to play her is just gonna be you give her tenacity, you give her fav, you put her on a team that you don't really have something else to put in that slot, and I guess you get 20% attack and a few particles. Like, you basically use her as a worse albedo. We're gonna remove a few of these that, like, there's no real reason to use, and then let's try to order them. I guess it'd be something like this. Now, obviously, if you use a team where you actually like have shielding, or you're a god gamer and you never get hit, you can use Serpent Spine. The thing is, on other characters, if you get hit once, you lose 1 stack of Serpent Spine. So you need to get hit 5 times to lose all 5 stacks. With Dehya, if you get hit once, you take that damage over time with your like damage mitigation, like her yoinking other people's damage, right? Which means that taking damage 1 time can actually knock out all of your Serpent Spine, assuming that they don't change it. Which maybe they do, and if they do, Serpent Spine would obviously be the best 4-star option, but yeah. Now let's talk about artifact sets. If you're playing her in, like, as a carry, her best set is gonna be the 3.6 artifact set. Man, it's fine. It'll be all right. Two piece, technically doable, but go emblem anyways. Emblem is going to be a lot better because her ER requirements are actually pretty high. If you don't go carry, you can go 4-piece TOM. You can go 4-piece instructor. You could go noblesse, but there's no reason to go noblesse over TOM. You could go exile, but there's no reason to go exile over TOM. I guess lava walker as well is technically doable. But yeah, and then 4-piece flop / 4-piece gilded. Best in slot for Virgin, but like I said earlier, she won't be very good in Virgin. But I know some people are going to want to play her there because honestly she's not going to be good anywhere, so at least because Virgin is a transformative reaction, like sure it won't be a good Virgin team at all, but it might actually still be able to clear in time, so that's that. Artifact, stats, attack, pyro, crit, best in slot for carry. You can technically go EM pyro crit as well. In this case, it'd be about 1.5% worse. EM pyro crit. Fine for vape. You can basically use an EM sense if it's like really good, it has really good stats, but generally I'd still try to go for attack. ER pyro crit might be necessary because her ER requirements are pretty high, so your best way to read them might be with an ER sense. EM, best in slot for Virgin. ER/EM/EM might be necessary for Virgin. Oh. Because again, her ER requirements are pretty high. In Virgin teams, you don't really want to play double pyro, which means that you're going to need to make a lot of energy for her. And I guess I should say which weapon is better if you go for a Virgin team. Honestly, I'd probably still go Fav. But if your ER requirements are fine, I guess you go for the mailed flower. Does she want to burst in Virgin? I mean, not really, but also yes. If you don't burst, you just have 12 seconds of uptime, which means that you're going to get a lot of seeds that don't actually get Virgins. And then finally, HP/HP for TOM, I guess. HP/HP/HP. Crit, so Fav can proc. Because that's what she does. She procs Fav and then she swaps out. Teams. Melt, Ganyu. Yeah, assuming that her resistance interruption is good enough not to need a shielder, then this is fine. Like, this is her best option. This is realistically the only team where I feel like there's an actual reason to play her over the alternatives. Virgin, significantly worse than Homa. Vape, Dehya, worse than Diluc. Mono, Pyro, about as good as Xinyan. It's better if your Xinyan C0. Hu Tao, Vape, technically not garbage, but it gives you power resonance in TOM if you play double Hydro Hu Tao, and some defensive utility that's not completely useless. Let me specify. Double Hydro. Hyper Bloom, don't use her abilities. Fine, I guess. Like, that's what we're resorting to. Use them instead. I think that's the best way to put it, actually. These are the depths that we're scraping. I guess air fryer. For those of you who don't know, air fryer is when you use animal units to trigger burning. And with Nahida, you can maintain like 100% burning uptime and pyro uptime. And you get a bunch of pyro swirls. It's not the greatest team in single target, but it functions and it's pretty good in AoE. But as you can see in single target, not the best. But it is actually pretty good in AoE because you get some like pseudo quadratic scaling and your damage is like basically very, very AoE bad. You don't want to play her in air fryer because you're gonna die. Air fryer can actually do damage to yourself, and if you need a defensive option, you'd rather use Bennett. And if your Bennett's busy, you'd rather use a Pyro Shielder because burning is pyro damage, so Pyro Shields are 2.5 times as effective as they usually are, right? So Toma or C4 Yanfei, even Xinyan is something you'd rather use. Like I don't even know what to say, man. This is the first time where I'm seriously considering a Constellation. Because I want to get her, because I think she's cool, but she's gonna feel so fucking unplayable at C0 that I'm unironically considering like getting a few Constellations. Speaking of which, let's go through her cons real quick. C1, HP increased by 20% and she deals bonus damage based on her max HP when using the following attack, so E and burst. About a 30% increase. If her C1 was her baseline, she'd still be pretty bad. C2 makes her field last longer and deal a lot more damage. Her field is a pretty low percentage of her damage to begin with, so it's not like that insane of a Constellation. Alright, so it's about a 10% increase. Then we got the talent levels, you've got the ER Constellation, that's actually pretty good. I'll give them money. Oh, I won't give them money. Well, when I say I'm considering getting a few cons, I'm not saying I'm considering swiping. I'm saying I'm considering using my saved up Primo gems. By the way, like I'm saying this, but realistically, I probably won't. Like maybe I would use some of those Primos if I wasn't a content creator, but I don't know. And then her C6 is like pretty good, but effectively, right? C1 is like a pretty good C1. C2's meh. C3 is pretty decent. C4 is pretty decent. C5 is pretty shit. And then C6 is pretty good. Her Constellations are like above average, but because she's so garbage to begin with, like she's not that good at C6. Or like I said earlier, at C5, she's not really doing more damage than a C0 Hu Tao. At C6, she's somewhat similar to a C1R1 Hu Tao. If you're looking for a pyro carry, this ain't it. Dehya is really just a character that you go for because you think the playstyle looks really, really cool, or you think she looks cool, and that's it. Hi, this is like a week later, Zajef, whatever. I just wanted to basically add a few clarifications, which will basically be ways that she could eventually be better in the future. Before I get into that though, I want to make it incredibly clear and very, very clear. This is a gacha game. She's gonna get a rerun. Pulling for a unit right now, expecting things in the future to make them better is a recipe for disaster because you might not like the unit that makes them better, or you might not have the primos to go for it once it arrives. There's an infinite number of things that could happen that would make you, even if she were to get things that make her better in the future, that would make you regret going for her now, especially considering that she's gonna get a rerun eventually, so you can just get her on her rerun if she does get better in the meantime. That being said, I do want to talk about the possible things to basically look out for in future units and future content that could potentially make her better. So one thing that I realized since I recorded most of the pre-release is that in the latest beta cycle, I talked about how they buffed her interruption resistance. They actually buffed it a lot. She basically effectively gives infinite resistance to interruption for the 9 seconds that her passive is in effect, which is a useful thing in some teams, which we'll talk about. Effectively, I've talked a lot about how her damage is effectively just a joke. I stand by that. I think her damage is really, really bad. The reason why I focused a pretty good amount of the pre-release on it initially is because it's very clear that a character like Dehya, a 5-star character that's given some really cool animations for their burst, a player that sees her for the first time is gonna try to make her work with her burst. The reality is because of all of the things that I talked about, because her numbers on her burst are so horrendously unironically comparable to Xinyan, outshined by Diluc level. Because of that, it means that the only actual functional relevant part of her kit for most people is just gonna be her skill. I didn't want to focus too much on playing her just as an E-bot in the initial pre-release, because I don't think that's how most people will try to play her. But that also does mean that I didn't give her as much credit as I probably should have in teams where you use her as an E-bot. So let's fix that right now. And let's talk about Melt Ganyu a little bit. So with the changes to the interruption resistance, she's now actually a pretty solid option for Melt Ganyu, or at least she should be. You're still gonna need a healer because Dehya's damage mitigation is like, think of it as kind of like Sing Tao's damage reduction, but worse. If Sing Tao's not enough to make you live without a healer, Dehya won't be either. Which means that for most people, especially in a team like Melt Ganyu, you're still gonna need to go for a healer. And because Bennett is just so broken in Melt Ganyu teams, that's not really a downside. So you'd still go Bennett, you'd go Bennett, Dehya, Ganyu, and then the last slot can either be just another pyro unit, like Zhongling. But in a situation like that, there's just not much of a reason to play her over Zhongling. If you play like 3 pyro like that, you're still gonna need additional pyro application because her skill won't be enough to melt all of Ganyu's charge shots. You can just slow down your charge shots, that's a thing you can do, and then it'll be enough-ish. But all in all, like as a general rule, it's just not really something I'd recommend. However, you can get additional pyro application by using someone like Nahida with burning. And if you do that, you should be able to get more than enough pyro app. Now, I'm not sure if it's going to be enough pyro app to actually be able to use your burst on Ganyu in a team like that. Either way, you're not generating a lot of energy, so even if you were to use your burst, you can't use it very often unless you build a ton of ER, which you don't want to do because you don't have a cryo battery. But like that's one thing I'll look into is like the consistency of melting your stuff with Ganyu's burst. But all in all, just like playing her like Ganyu, Bennett, Dehya, Nahida, you don't need another pyro unit. You can actually just melt with only Nahida, but it's a little difficult to do. And if you fuck up at any given point, you might just lose your pyro and then you don't melt anymore. I think I have a video on that on my channel. I don't remember which one it is, so you can go ahead and look. I think it was on like an Ask Zajef Ganyu or something like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, like it's possible without an off-field pyro, but the off-field pyro will make it a lot more easy, and Dehya also does give you basically infinite resistance interruption for the time that her passive is in effect, which is also very useful in a Melt Ganyu team where you need to spend almost like 2 seconds charging your charge shot where you can't dodge, otherwise you have to start over, right? All in all, this is a team where she will actually be useful, but it's just not... Even in a team like that, she won't be that insane. The reason why there's a reason to put her in a team like that, but not really in other teams, is because when it comes to defensive utility, Toma will generally just be better. And when it comes to off-field pyro application, Toma will also generally just be better. And when it comes to damage, if you're not using Dehya's burst, Toma will also generally be better. And if you are using her burst, then you're spending a lot of time on her. In the future, there could be more reverse melt carries, cryo units, that get released that could care about something like this. There could be hydro units that get released that want to play with Burgeon and forward vape stuff that don't do normal attacks, right? So Dehya's burst itself, right? It doesn't proc normal attack stuff, it doesn't proc Sing Tao, it doesn't proc Yalan. So they could release a hydro unit that has an effect that does the same thing, so you couldn't play Toma, because Toma's power application is tied to normal attacks. So if they like really want to, they can always find ways to release units to make her be the only option that you have for the team to work. The thing is, it's not that she's gonna be good in those teams, it's that they can pigeonhole a comp, they can like restrict it enough that Dehya could be the only like unit that really functions, and then make the new unit for it really strong to the point where the team would be good. They can also just release a new artifact set that would be tailored to her. If they were to release something that when you take damage, your burst deals more damage or something like that, and like they could balance it in ways that are good on Dehya, but don't really work on Burgeon on-fielders, right? That they wouldn't be able to use it. Because otherwise, like, you can take damage through Burgeon and use the set on them. And because her numbers are so weak, right? So, just to make it clear, like, right now I'm talking about how they could make her, like, as a burst unit be potentially good. Because her numbers are so weak, the set would need to be insanely strong. But for the set to be insanely strong and still not just break the game by making Sangling incredibly broken, they would also need to make it very restricted for it to only really be able to function on Dehya. All in all, right, again, I want to make it clear, it's very possible that in the future, it's also possible that there's ways that I haven't thought of that they might make her better, but as of her release, as of 3.5, as of the state of the game in 3.4, she won't be good. And you should know that if you're gonna go for her, because otherwise you might go for her and then get frustrated that she just doesn't do enough damage. Always better to pull for a unit with more information than less. Another thing I wanted to do is talk about how even units that are pretty bad, when you put them in the right teams, can still be functional. Right, so I've talked about how she's kind of similar to Xinyan's output. I play Xinyan Mono Pyro pretty often. It's a team that makes Xinyan function. It's just Xinyan's not doing much in the team. But in teams like that, where you're basically having the rest of your team do all of your DPS, you'll be able to make Dehya functional. You'll be able to have teams that can clear without too much of a problem. It's just, are you willing to spend the primo gems to get the unit for them to basically just be on your team just to look pretty? Some people are, some people aren't, and I'd rather like mention it too often and be annoying than to have someone like think she's gonna be good and then get hella disappointed. But yeah, like as you can see, right, like we still do reasonable damage, and yeah, Xinyan's not doing that much of it, but she is still doing a somewhat okay portion of the team's DPS. She's doing less than the rest of the team, and she's taking way more field time, which is basically gonna be the same thing as Dehya, but she still does do some damage. Like when she comes out, you'll probably see some showcases from C0R1 or C0R0 Dehya, where you actually do get like 100k hit on your burst at C0R0 with like really good artifact. That's a thing that is very possible to happen. Just remember that won't necessarily be your experience. And again, right, I'll say it again because I really want to hammer it home. It's always better to know more about the unit before you pull. You'd rather know what the thing's flaws are before you get it than after you get it. I'd rather you learn it here in the pre-release and get angry at me because you don't care and you want to go for her anyways, than that you learn it after you wish for her and it actually kind of bothers you. Either way, that's gonna be it for the things I wanted to add. I'm just so deflated. I guess we can talk a little bit about her upsides. Like, yeah, her DPS is very, very bad, but at least she front loads that damage a lot, which means that for like very squishy enemies that then have a shield or something like that that you have to break, she's okay. If you actually look at her DPS while her burst is active, it is actually pretty similar to Hu Tao. The main difference is basically just that her animations are significantly longer to get to that burst, and she doesn't have that DPS for nearly as long as Hu Tao does. All in all, right, C0 to C0, Dehya versus Hu Tao, it's about half the damage overall. Like, that's another thing to keep in mind. Her animations are very long. Her E animation, the recast animation, the burst animation, the final cake animation. You actually end up, even if her burst says 4 seconds, if you're using your E and your burst and you're doing it all, you're spending close to 10 seconds on field, even if you're only hitting enemies for 4. So you're spending the same time on field as Hu Tao, is just you're only dealing Hu Tao level damage for less than half of that time. So you end up with about half of that damage. It is what it is, you know? We're gonna Prayge that an artifact comes out that proves me wrong. Hey, fuck. We're gonna pray that both me and every other theory crafter have missed something. That we missed an insane mechanic with her that makes her be broken. All right, maybe if you do like AD, right click, E, dash, jump, Q, it triples her burst damage. I think that does it for the pre-release. If you really do want to force her, the best results that you'll get are going to be in Mono Pyro with Tingling, or you might be alright with Ganyu Melt, again, right? Like, it depends on how much resistance or interruption you get. You'll get good results out of playing her in a Hyper Bloom team where you don't use any of her skills, just because, yeah, 3-unit Hyper Bloom team is good. You can actually use her skill in a Hyper Bloom team and just have some of those Hyper Blooms be Burgeons instead. It's not like that's too bad. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. It's just not looking great. Anyways, thank you for watching. Comment down below. I want you to repeat after me, okay? Our Father who art in heaven. Hear me out, man, please. I beg of you. There's this video game, Mr. God, sir. It's called Genshin Impact. A lot of the times, it really sucks, but sometimes it's really cool. And in this video game, there's this character that's gonna be released soon that I think is pretty nifty. Quite fun. Very cool. Like, triple thumbs up. And it would be really nice if she wasn't the Antichrist. You know, that's all I'm saying, alright? Just don't make her the Antichrist, please. So, comment this down below, please. I need your power. Yeah, comment it under every Dehya video you see, true. But yeah, that's gonna be it for the pre-release. Goodbye, YouTube.
After the version 3.6 update, which, to be clear, is the one after this upcoming 3.5 update, she will become available in the standard wish. Beacon of the Night Sea will be available in the version 3.5 weapon event.